Hey everybody, I'm David Schloss, editor of Imaging Resource, and I want to tell you the reasons that I think that this is one of the best entry-level cameras on the market today. Okay, maybe not entry level, it's not going to be like $1,000 price point camera, but for under $2,000, you get a phenomenal value in the Nikon system. This camera is the successor to the Nikon Z5, and like its siblings, the Z6 and the Z7, the first version did not have fantastic autofocus. Now, Nikon won't admit to that, but anybody who worked with those systems know that they were not up on par with other systems. So now the Z5 II, Z6 III, and the Z7 II all have really upped the game. The Z5 II has a lot of features that make this a better camera. First of all, the autofocus is fantastic now. I think that Canon and Sony still have a little bit of the edge when it comes to the eye detect autofocus, but just by a little bit these days. This camera got much better low light performance than its predecessor. It's a really good camera at this point for low light. I'll tell you why when we get back up to the studio. But capturing stars handheld and nearly complete darkness at this ISO is just amazing. One of my favorite things about this camera is that it is lightweight, compact, and at an affordable price. Nikon has really been trying to dig into its competitors by giving you cameras at a slightly lower price point than you would expect for similar systems at similar manufacturers. All right, I'm going to go inside to the studio now because the sun is dropping, which you might not be able to tell because the camera is on auto ISO, and so it should be handling the lower light really well, but my fingers are really cold and I could use some hot chocolate, so let's go on inside. I'll get some hot chocolate and then I'll meet you at my studio. We'll talk some more. Okay, I'm in my studio where it's nice and warm. I have my mug of hot chocolate, and let's talk about the Z5 II. Spoiler alert, though you might have figured this out already, I love this camera. I grew up shooting Nikon, so testing its cameras is always like a trip back to my childhood. The 24 megapixel sensor may not sound impressive on paper when you're comparing it to something like a 45 megapixel or 60 megapixel camera, but for most photographers, 24 megapixel is more than enough resolution. You can print large, you can crop significantly, and the files are manageable sizes for storage and editing. A 24 megapixel sensor is also really great for low noise images. So what Nikon has done here is prioritize low light performance over megapixel count, and that's the right call for this camera, I think. The ISO range goes all the way up to 102,400 ISO. Now, I wouldn't shoot at that maximum ISO regularly, but the fact that you can push to, say, ISO 6400 or even 12,800 and still get very usable images is great at this price point. So I think that wedding photographers, event shooters, landscape photographers, really anybody working in challenging lighting conditions is going to really love what this sensor can do. So the colors coming out of this camera are excellent. Nikon has always had great color science, although everyone always talks about Canon for some reason, and Nikon's great colors continue here. Skin tones look natural without a lot of post-processing work needing to be done. The dynamic range is strong enough that you've got really good latitude between highlights and shadows in your editing. And I really love some of the shots that I got with this camera, especially these scenes on a beach. The sun was nearly completely set in this image. And I think that the low light performance was really great. I also think that this camera is one of the best values in photography in the under $2,000 range. It doesn't feel exactly like a beginner camera, but it doesn't feel like a professional's camera either, if that makes sense. But compared to the competition at this price point, the Z5 II really holds its own against anything from Sony or Canon in this price range. Nikon has been really aggressive with their pricing to try and compete with the other two players. You also get pro level speed with this camera. The maximum frame rate with the mechanical shutter is 11 frames per second with RAW, and the electronic shutter goes up to 30 frames a second. Now, that's faster than really any pro camera of a couple years ago could achieve, and it's just about double what the Z5 could do. But that 30 frames a second is JPEG only. So you're trading RAW editing capabilities for speed. That's fine for a lot of shooters, but for pros, that will probably make this a no-go. There's also pre-release capture, which is my favorite function of the modern mirrorless era. When shooting birds and wildlife, it is almost impossible to snag the moment when the animal makes its move. Before pre-release capture, I just occasionally fire off a couple of shots in case the hawk I was looking at was about to leap from its perch. I have a lot of images that are basically birds just sitting there. With pre-release, I never have to worry about that. But the pre-release capture is JPEG, so you might get the decisive moment, but it won't be as high res if you were shooting on one of Nikon's other cameras that do RAW with pre-release. What you also don't get is a new sensor. This is the same sensor that's found on several Nikon models, including the Z5, but the new processor gives you a lot more power. It's why the frame rate is so high now, for example. Excuse me. Nikon also has one of the best menu systems on the market, in my mind. I've mentioned in other camera reviews that Sony's cameras are the most customizable, but I also think that they're the most confusing. I think Nikon and then Canon have much better menu systems. I do like the flip-out LCD screen for vlogging and self-recording, although mostly using this for photos. I really wish that could also tilt up and down, like this excellent tilty footage screen here on the Sony A7 IV. Now there's only 299 phase detect autofocus points, which cover about 90% of the frame. Some systems have about 425, 430 autofocus points that cover more of the frame. I haven't seen any particular autofocus issues by not having as many points as other systems, but it's got to be that the more points are better, right? More important though, it has subject detection for people, animals, vehicles, and airplanes. The eye detection autofocus is sticky and reliable. I mentioned that earlier, that Canon and Sony might have a slight edge still when it comes to eye detect autofocus, but there were very few times when the Z5 II didn't lock onto the eyes correctly with humans. It's also good with animals, but I didn't really test it with planes and trains and automobiles much because I've just always found that those are subjects that autofocus happens to pick up on anyhow. Okay, so now let's talk about the Z6 III versus the Z5 II because that's the obvious comparison here. So at about $500 more expensive than the Z5 II, is the Z6 III worth it? It depends on what kind of things you're shooting. The Z6 III also has a better EVF, faster continuous shooting speeds, and a more robust autofocus tracking system. But here's the thing, if you're primarily a still shooter or someone who shoots video, but then doesn't need something like raw recording internally, the Z5 II gives you something like 70 to 80% of the video features for about 60% of the price. Roughly speaking, there's no real way to do the math on that, I made those numbers up. Nikon has created something really special here by distilling what makes their high-end cameras great and packaging it in an affordable, small body. It's not small like a fixed lens compact camera, but compared to other mirrorless bodies with interchangeable lenses, it's small, and it is full of features. It's like you get a whole keg of beer in a six-pack. That's not a good metaphor. I'm going to have to work on that one. This is definitely the camera I would recommend for a Nikon shooter moving up from APS-C to a full-frame camera, or to content creators who need good video alongside their excellent stills, and also to the photographer who wants reliable performance without paying for features that they will not use. Is it perfect? Nope. If you need the absolute fastest autofocus tracking, higher frame rates, or professional video features, you're going to want to look at something like the Z6 III or the Z8 or the Z9. But for what most people are actually shooting, the Z5 II delivers where it counts. That's why, again, I think this is one of the best cameras that Nikon has ever made. Not because it has the most impressive spec sheet, but because it gets the fundamentals right at a price point that makes full-frame photography and quality video accessible to a lot more people. So if you're shooting with Nikon or another camera brand and you're thinking about the Z5 II, let me know in the comments below why this is an interesting camera to you. I'm especially interested if cameras with better video features aren't appealing to you because you're more of a stills photographer. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them. For Imaging Resource, I'm editor David Schloss, and until next time, go out there and give it your best shot.